Christian nationalism is an inevitable ingredient in our democracy.
Christian nationalism should have no place in our democracy.
The American Religious Town Hall is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
I'm James Weingartner, sitting in for Pastor Jerry Lutz, and it's so good to have you with us. And our panel would like to welcome you, and I welcome you on behalf of the American Town Hall. Let's have our panel introduce themselves to you at this time.
My name is Canon John Peterson. I am an Episcopal priest, canonically resident in the Diocese of Washington, D.C.
I'm Andrea Luxton. I'm president of Andrews University in Berrien Springs, Michigan, which is affiliated with the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Hello, my name is Mel Robeck. I'm Senior Professor of Church History and Ecumenics and Special Assistant to the President for Ecumenical Relations at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. I'm also an Assemblies of God minister.
I'm Tony Matthews, and I'm the Senior Pastor at North Garland Baptist Fellowship in Garland, Texas.
Well, let's get right into our topic. Long before the events took place in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, mainline Evangelical and Pentecostal Christian church leaders were warning against the rise of Christian nationalism in the United States. In some ways, the United States was born out of British Christian nationalism. British Christian nationalism was an enormously powerful commitment for white American colonists, that one that most patriots today only broke with great reluctance in 1776. Matthew McCulloch defines American Christian nationalism as, quote, an understanding of American identity and significance held by Christians wherein the nation is a central actor in the world historical purposes of the Christian God, unquote. McCulloch argued that was generated the strongest expression of Christian nationalism in 30 or 40 years ago. Evangelist Billy Graham saw the Cold War as a conflict between Christian values of America and atheist values of the Soviets. Today, Christian nationalism is symbolized by the mob that stormed the Capitol carrying signs that read, "Jesus saves," and one of the rioters stood on the Senate rostrum and led a Christian prayer. Today, I'd like our panelists to discuss these three questions. One, what is your personal opinion of Christian nationalism, and what stand has your church or synagogue taken about Christian nationalism today? Question two, do you agree or disagree with a letter that a coalition of 100 evangelical Christian pastors, ministry, and seminary leaders wrote following the January 6th insurrection, saying, quote, we recognize that evangelicalism and white evangelicalism in particular, has been susceptible to the heresy of Christian nationalism because of a long history of faith leaders accommodating white supremacy, unquote. And three, given our history, is Christian nationalism an essential ingredient to our democracy? And these questions are ones that we're anxious to hear. We'll start with Dr. Luxton.
Thank you. You'll notice that in my statement at the beginning, I changed the word essential ingredient in our democracy to an inevitable ingredient to our democracy. And let me explain what I mean by that. I'm going to come at this from my own background. My own background is English literature, so looking at stories and looking at stories from many different perspectives. I think when we look at a nation, every nation has a story. Starts from its beginning and moves through. And through that, there are many threads. They start at one point and they keep going. And in a sense, if you like, we're in the middle, always in the middle of a story with the next chapter coming ahead. So if you look at it in that context, it seems to me that Christian nationalism, as we've already heard, started as a thread in the story of the United States very early. And it's something that is ongoing. That doesn't just cut off. That's why I say it is inevitable. It is part of who the United States is and is likely to continue into the future. But to me, the challenge is not the fact that it's part of the narrative, but that I'd like to suggest it has become a meta-narrative. What I mean by a meta-narrative is a kind of controlling story. It's something that you impose on everything that happens, and then you start reading everything through it. And it seems to me that Christian nationalism has put itself in a position of declaring that this meta-narrative of Christian nationalism actually is the controlling narrative of the whole of the American story. And you have to see everything that comes through that lens. And that means that not only do people who are Christian nationalists interpret events through their lens, but they tell everyone else that it must be truth for them too, because this is the true American story. Therefore, you have to buy into it. That, to me, is what is dangerous about it. Inevitable, but dangerous. And, of course, what is the assumption? Basically, the assumption is that one nation or race is consistently central to the story of Christian faith and world events. And as soon as you say that meta-narrative diminishes others and mistakenly assumes God has favorites. So it completely flies in the face of Galatians 3:16, for example, and in my mind, it ends up distorting truth by claiming it's truth. I'll stop there for now. More to say later.
John?
I agree with you. But you really changed the heading of this, your statement to be on my side. Thank you so much. As Andrea said, Christian nationalism is not a new phenomenon in this country. And for that matter, it really goes back to Andrea's native land, to Great Britain. And in Great Britain, they certainly had this very powerful and still powerful in many respects commitment to a white nationalism. And this became certainly something with, as the moderator said, great reluctance did the patriots of 1776 actually give this up, and particularly the British rule. In this nation, there have been several forms of Christian nationalism. Originally, the British Protestant nationalism was the strongest point, of course, and that came in tension with the Catholic national powers from France and from Spain. So what we have here, actually starting very early, is this tension between different nationalisms of immigrants who were coming and establishing and coming into the United States. Today's Christian nationalism, many scholars date back now to the Cold War. Thomas Kidd, the distinguished professor at Baylor University and a Baptist himself, has made a very important observation about the Cold War, and I'm quoting, "In many ways, the fight against Soviet communism set the modern template for white evangelical engagement with politics." Kidd continues, "This helps explain why so many today's ardent adherents of Christian nationalism were also children of the Cold War." So I'm going to stop at this place, and then I have a lot more to say too with Andrea, I'm sure.
Tony?
Christian nationalism, I'll begin with a quote by a prominent Christian leader in the country, and because the definition of Christian nationalism can vary, but he says that if Christian nationalism means being a good Christian is equated with being a good American, and being a good American is the same thing as being a good Christian, he says that's faulty. Because there are some good Americans who are not Christians, and there are some good Christians who are not Americans. And I can attest to that, and all of us can, because we've traveled out of the country many times, and we know that there are Christians in many parts of the world, and they're not Americans. The moderator referenced the incident on January 6th of 2020, I believe, or 2021. I can't remember which year. But what we saw there, when you mix politics with the cross or our theology, it was confusing for so many people to see the political and the theological come together, and to see swastikas and other signs and symbols of hatred and even speech mixed in with Christianity. It was confusing to a whole lot of people who aren't Christians, and for that matter, it was confusing to a lot of Christians. So I think we have to be real careful when it comes to combining and amalgamating the political and the theological and the national, because there's a lot of things that we just don't get right, and I think this was one of the things that was troubling to a lot of people, what we saw there. So the 100 evangelical Christian pastors who certainly signed the document, they are free to do so. I think this is going to be a topic that will not go away. I think it needs to have we need to do a deeper dive in the definition and the meaning and what all that means and how that's going to play out in the country. And we have to be real careful to make sure that, I think it was Francis Schaeffer, and I may have that person wrong who said this, but I believe it was Schaeffer who said, when you wrap the cross or wrap the flag inside the cross or vice versa, something very unholy is taking place. Mm-hmm. And so we just have to be real careful in that vein.
Thank you, Tony. Mel?
Yeah, I was thinking about this when John first began, and he talked about Christian nationalism starting, in a sense, in Britain. And certainly I see this play out in American church history as we think about it. These people, these Puritans coming from Britain here to establish a new colony, a new nation, in a sense, seeking to be the light on the hill that everybody looks to and says, that's what Christianity is all about. It's just, and opening things up. Nobody ever stops to think that there's a flip side to that light. There's an awful lot of darkness here in which people's lives were taken, land was stolen. We left a terrible heritage there. But it also led politically, I think, into things like Manifest Destiny and this whole idea that we not only start with that hill in Boston or wherever it was, but now move across the nation from east to west, from sea to shining sea. And we sing about that in America the Beautiful, right? But there's another side to church history in the United States, and that is the Spanish and the French, and they were Catholics. And they were not Protestants, and they were not white as such, They had a very different way of looking at things, and they start from the Southwest, in a sense. I mean, they were down in Florida for a while, and they were along the Gulf Coast, but the reality is they really made their impact along the West Coast, especially the Spanish. It's a very different story there. They didn't see it. I mean, in a sense, they were stopping that white Christian nationalism that was pressing westward, ever westward. They ultimately lost because, they invested heavily in Mexico, both the French and the Spanish. They lost a great deal of the Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Texas, all of those kinds of things. So we really need to be careful about how we see these things. And when I look at the insurrection that took place in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, I don't see anything Christian there at all. Mm-hmm. I don't care whether they were saying Christian prayers or not. There was nothing Christian in what they were doing. They were running rampant over both the law and the people of the United States. They wanted their way. It was a selfish way, and they expressed themselves in a very selfish manner. But they co-opted the church in that process. They co-opted a lot of evangelicals, but it wasn't, I think, a religious co-optation. It was a political co-optation. And I think that we really need to really stop and rethink about how we talk about evangelicals and the religious right, in a sense. Yeah, some of them are very much Christian nationalists. Others of them are not at all. Right. They're really Americans who care a great deal about where the country is going and what's happening. But we all need correction. We all need correction. And I would say that what started out as kind of Christian nationalism in the United States in the Cold War era, and I would go back as far as the Civil War. I would go back to the Klan, which was in a sense trying to argue that they were Christian nationalists, they were Christian, and they were there for the country, and it's going to be all the flag and apple pie and mom and, you know, all this stuff. But the reality, they were racist, and they were fighting against, you know, Jews and blacks, and, you know, and that was out of enormous amount of fear, because they felt like they were being overwhelmed by the North, who had made some major decisions on their behalf through that war. I mean, it cost everybody, you know, millions of people, but through that war. And it seems to me that we really need to think seriously about the modern origins of Christian nationalism and how that's played out.
John?
You started your comments, Mel, reminding us of the Indians.
Yeah.
And I think that from that very point that you made, we see the racism that's involved in Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
And that plays out with the Spanish.
Yep.
It plays out every inch of the way in relationship to what's going on. And today it's taken on a new manifestation. It's not the same as with the Pilgrim Fathers, but it's taking on a different manifestation. But the roots are the same, and that's racism and the supremacy of white people. And the Indians were bye-bye. You know, we might have had a good Thanksgiving dinner together, but that was it. And so I think we have to be very careful in carefully defining the issues that have been defined around this table today with regard to this problem.
Andrew?
Yeah. So I think the challenge is that this group, this Christian nationalist group, is not identifiable just evangelicals or just this group or just this group. It's a band that crosses through all of them, and they're coalescing together under several banners. And that's what when I talked about that meta-narrative, which really focuses on, you know, the nation. This is the best nation. This is the best race. That kind of superiority, which kind of drives the whole of the conversation. I think the challenge of it is it gives credence to a political stance by identifying it as the will of God. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you do that, it dulls the conscience of those involved to their responsibilities to living by the principles of the Ten Commandments or the New Testament, right? Command to love one another, love God and love one another. It almost becomes irrelevant because this becomes the driving ideology that is so strong, and everything is fed through it. If something doesn't fit into that, then you put it down. And that is what's so difficult to approach. How do you actually deal and respond to that?
Tony?
Yeah, this is such a good conversation, and I may get myself into trouble saying this, but I think when we go back to that January 6th incident, I think Jason Meyer writes about how we have to guard against reductionism. We have to make sure that we acknowledge and recognize that there were some people there who were not part of the radical craziness that was taking place. They were just there because they love their country. Similar to a lot of the protests that we saw surrounding some of the recent incidents, like the George Floyd murder, some of the chaos that we've seen in the country. But in the midst of the protesters, you had people who were rioting and looting, and then people lumped them all together. I think when we deal with topics like this, we have to be kind of sensitive and careful not to lump everyone together. And I think that's critical. Also, this quote I want to mention from Meyer, he says, when the symbols of Christianity are melded together with the symbols of political identity, then those who love the name of Christ must attempt to pull them apart with all of our might, so that we can, because Christ and Christianity stand alone. And we need to make sure that we're the city on the hill that will preach and teach that message.
Thank you, Tony. Let's go to a break, and we'll be right back.
We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you and today's closing statements.
Welcome back. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any thoughts on this subject or any other, please let us know by mail or email. Go to our website. This is our forum to discuss things as civil Americans can, in a way that is not hateful or angry, but in a way that is informative, instructive, and educational. So we're here today for that, so please write us back. We now have an opportunity to have our panelists sum up their ideas on this subject, and we'll begin with that now with John.
Thank you. You mentioned in your final words George Floyd. And I don't think that we can underestimate what happened on January 6th without George Floyd. And I think that much of what came out of that certainly is as a result of how the United States is responding to George Floyd. And the call that George Floyd has given to us to understand that we are a multi-ethnic nation. And literally at this point here, Christian nationalism stands in opposition to that. I love you, Tony.
Mel?
That's good. That you love him.
We're good friends.
You know, all Christians are in a sense called to be, in a sense, nationalists, in the sense that they're called to obey the laws of the land and to be good citizens, okay? To pray for the people who are in leadership, those kinds of things. I mean, that's really, that in a sense, that functions as a form of nationalism. Christian nationalism, I would say. It's not what we're talking about, though. Right. And it shouldn't be, because the world it's a globe, and it's made up of nation states of all kinds around the world. And in our tradition, Jesus died for all of them, you know? So I think to identify strictly with a nation or a concept of a nation, namely a white nation, a white Protestant evangelical nation, I think it's all wrong-headed. I think we ought not to be going there. But I do think that we need to think seriously about what constitutes these sorts of things and why it is that people gravitate to these kinds of positions. And I think it has to do a great deal with fear about changes that they see going on around them that they do not control, and feel like, you know, if we band together at this level, perhaps we can save what God has given to us in the first place.
I.e. George Floyd.
Yeah, that's sure.
Thanks, Bill. Tony?
Certainly, I have to say something to my friend John. And in closing, I am simply saying that it's unfair to lump everyone together. The riots that we saw surrounding the George Floyd case, many people were there just protesting. They weren't rioting. And to put them all in one bucket is wrong. Just as I think that if there were people there on that January 6th day, we cannot say that they were all there to cause harm. Some of them may have walked away that we don't know. That's all I'm saying, is that to put everybody together is problematic. And then finally, the last quote I want to say is this. I love this quote: "We must always reject any attempt to fuse together one's national political identity with one's Christian identity in a way that equates or conflates allegiance to country with allegiance to God."
Powerful. Dr. Luxton?
So this comment may get me in trouble at the end here. But going back to my British roots that John mentioned, I think when I grew up, there was in the years I was in England, there was this tension that escalated considerably around the fact that England had been this great world nation, which God had favored highly, which is Christian nationalism and its whole thinking, right? Which had impacted the way we had reacted to other countries. But that was changing. England was diminishing. Couldn't say that any longer. And I actually think that some of what we're seeing in America is some of that same tension that's going on. It isn't maybe all it has promised to be. And so we got to hold on to this for dear life. We are the chosen race. We are the chosen people. I think that leads to this anger. And so I think that is at least part of the understanding. The challenge is, we haven't come up with how we solve this. And I don't think maybe we can't, at least not in this show, but it's because it's much more challenging than that. It's such a deep-seated belief. I think it has to be by constant conversation and looking at who God is in other ways. God is not. I find it insulting to say that God is blessing one race more than others. Even if it's something that's an unconscious feeling, I think we have to really consciously and consistently attack that perception.
Thank you. The charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America, we believe in civil and religious freedom not only in theory, but in reality. And now, friends, until next week, at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. May the God of all of us bless all of you.